Diane Webb returned to the U.S., her physical condition a stark contrast to when she left. At Coeur d'Alene Airport, she appeared thin, her movements were slow, and her eyes lacked their usual brightness, reflecting the trauma she had endured. Her family waited, their expressions a mix of anticipation and fear. When Kelly recognized her mother, her face paled at the sight. She whispered, "Oh, Mom," capturing the shock and relief of the moment. They approached Diane, relief evident but quickly replaced by concern. Her family embraced her gently, their relief tempered by the reality of her condition. In the hospital, doctors assessed Diane. She was found to be severely malnourished, dehydrated, and showing signs of psychological trauma. Diane had met Michael online, believing his promises of love. She was filled with joy at the prospect of a new beginning, evident in flashbacks where she laughed while reading his messages. The family's emotions were complex. They were relieved to have Diane back, yet shocked by her state. There was also profound concern for her recovery, both physical and emotional. Diane had traveled to Nigeria to meet Michael, only to be kidnapped. She had managed to call Kelly, warning her not to call back as her phone had been smashed, an indication of her dire situation. In the hospital, the family gathered, each dealing with the shock in their own way, united by their love for Diane. Kelly expressed her fear, saying to her siblings, "We were so scared. We didn't know if she'd come back." Diane's gaze was distant, reflecting on the betrayal she had suffered. Her journey back was one of survival, but the road to recovery was just beginning. This story of Diane Webb's return highlighted the severe consequences of romance scams. Her family, while relieved, faced the harsh reality of her ordeal. Her story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking in the pursuit of love online. Diane Webb, after losing her husband of many years, found herself grappling with loneliness. Her children, grown and living their lives, left her with ample time but little company. Seeking companionship, she ventured into the world of online dating, a world she was new to but one that promised new connections. She met Michael on a dating site. He presented himself as a successful businessman from Sweden, now working in Nigeria. His messages were filled with charm and the promise of a future. Diane was captivated by his words, the attention he gave her, and the stories he shared about his life. Michael spoke of love, of building a life together, which resonated deeply with Diane's longing for companionship. Their relationship progressed quickly. Michael was attentive, sending messages daily, sometimes multiple times a day, making Diane feel cherished. He shared pictures, told stories of his travels, and expressed a desire to meet her, painting a picture of a shared future. However, this charm soon mixed with manipulation. Michael began making financial requests. The first was small, an emergency with a business deal, he claimed. Diane, trusting his love, sent a modest amount, believing she was helping her future partner. Over time, these requests became more frequent and larger, amounting to over $300,000, each with a story that tugged at her heartstrings or played on her fears of losing him. Diane sold her house, believing they would soon live together, either in the U.S. or abroad. She liquidated assets, including her savings, to send him money for various emergencies, from releasing funds from a frozen account to medical bills for a supposed illness. As trust in Michael deepened, Diane's connection with her family weakened. She became more secretive about her relationship, her interactions with her family less frequent. Her children noticed changes. She seemed distracted, always on her computer or phone, waiting for Michael's messages. Each financial step Diane took further isolated her from reality and her loved ones. Her family grew concerned as they observed her selling off cherished possessions and withdrawing from social activities. They tried to intervene, to ask questions about Michael, but Diane was defensive, protective of what she believed was true love. The scam was sophisticated. Michael knew how to manipulate emotions, making Diane feel needed, loved, and part of something special. He played on her loneliness, her desire for companionship, and her trust in the promise of love. Each request for money was met with assurances of repayment, promises of a life together, keeping Diane engaged in the scam, her trust in Michael blinding her to the red flags. This phase of her life marked a transition from hopeful love to being ensnared in a web of deceit. Diane's story serves as a blunt reminder of how romance scams prey on the most human of desires, the need for connection and love, turning trust into vulnerability. Diane Webb's belief in her relationship with Michael reached its peak when he convinced her to travel to Nigeria. He had painted a picture of a romantic reunion in Enugu, where they would finally meet and begin their life together. Diane, fueled by months of digital love letters and promises, decided to meet Michael in person, using the last of her resources to make this dream a reality. She arrived in Enugu with her heart full of hope, expecting to see the man she thought she loved. However, the reality was far from the dream she had envisioned. Upon her arrival, instead of finding Michael, Diane was met by a group of men. Her expectations shattered. She was immediately confronted and accused. The men accused her of being a spy or having come for nefarious purposes, a narrative far removed from her intentions. In this moment of confusion and fear, Diane managed to make a call to her daughter, Kelly. Her voice was fraught with panic, and she quickly said, "Don't call me, my phone is smashed." This was the last communication her family had from her before she was taken. The call was a desperate signal of her distress, an alarm that something had gone terribly wrong. The kidnapping was swift. Diane was taken by these men, her freedom stripped away as she was moved to a location where she was held captive. Her days turned into a nightmare of captivity in Enugu, where she was subjected to harsh conditions, psychological abuse, and the constant threat of violence. The men held her for ransom, demanding money from her family back in the U.S. Her family was thrown into a frenzy of worry and action. The call from Diane was the catalyst. They now knew she was in danger. They scrambled to gather funds, contacting authorities and trying to understand the situation in Nigeria. The accusations against Diane, that she was involved in espionage or some form of criminal activity, were bewildering to her family, who knew her intentions were solely to meet someone she loved. During her captivity, Diane faced not only physical deprivation but also the emotional turmoil of realizing the depth of the deception. Michael was nowhere to be found. Instead, she was surrounded by captors who saw her only as a means to an end. Her health deteriorated due to lack of proper food, water, and medical care, and the psychological impact was profound, as she grappled with betrayal and fear. This ordeal in Enugu was a stark contrast to the life Diane had left behind in Idaho. She had gone seeking love and companionship, only to find herself in a situation of unimaginable horror. Her journey to Nigeria, meant to be the beginning of a new chapter, became a testament to the dangers of romance scams, where trust can lead to captivity rather than connection. Her family, now in a race against time, worked tirelessly to secure her release. But the days turned into weeks, and each moment was filled with uncertainty and the haunting question of whether they would see Diane alive again. This part of Diane's story is a grim reminder of how trust can be weaponized, turning an act of love into one of survival. Diane Webb's captivity in Enugu was a descent into a harsh reality far removed from the life she knew. Held in squalid conditions, she was subjected to the elements, with little food, water, or medical care. Her days were marked by fear, with the constant threat of violence hanging over her. The captors demanded ransom, their messages to her family back in the U.S. filled with threats, making it clear that Diane's life hung in the balance. Her family was thrust into a nightmare of their own. They rallied to meet the ransom demands, selling what they could, borrowing money, and reaching out for help. The emotional toll was immense. Each call from the captors, each demand for money, was a reminder of the danger Diane was in. They were dealing with grief, fear, and the uncertainty of whether their actions would ensure her safe return. Diane's imprisonment left deep emotional scars. Stripped of control and surrounded by captors, she faced daily torment, not just from physical deprivation, but from the crushing realization that she had been betrayed. The accusations against her, of being a spy or involved in criminal activities, further isolated her, stripping away any sense of understanding or justice. Months passed, and the ransom was paid, a sum that left the family financially devastated but desperate to save Diane. The exact details of her release remain shrouded in the chaos of such events, but finally, after an agonizing wait, Diane was freed. The relief was palpable, yet tempered by the knowledge of what she had endured. Her return to the U.S. was not one of celebration but of immediate concern for her health. Diane was emaciated, her body showing the signs of severe malnourishment and dehydration. The psychological impact was equally devastating. She was diagnosed with PTSD, her trust in others shattered, her sense of security gone. Upon her return, she was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked to stabilize her physically. However, the road to recovery was long, with the psychological scars perhaps the most challenging to heal. Her family, while relieved, had to now face the reality of supporting Diane through this recovery process. They saw a woman who had been vibrant and trusting reduced to someone haunted by her experiences, struggling to find peace. Diane's ordeal in Enugu was a stark lesson in the perils of romance scams. Her captors exploited her desire for love, turning it into a tool for extortion. Her family's experience was a testament to the lengths loved ones will go to save those they care about, but also to the profound emotional and financial cost of such crimes. This chapter of Diane's life, marked by captivity, ransom, and a return not to joy but to healing, serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking behind the facade of online relationships. Her story is a reminder of the need for vigilance, the importance of skepticism, and the enduring strength of familial bonds in the face of adversity. After Diane Webb's return to the U.S., the aftermath was as complex as the ordeal itself. Legally, the pursuit of justice for what she had endured was fraught with challenges. The scammers, likely part of a larger criminal network in Enugu, Nigeria, were difficult to prosecute due to jurisdictional complexities and the anonymity provided by the Internet. While some individuals were identified, including those directly involved in her kidnapping, bringing them to justice seemed elusive. The Nigerian authorities issued wanted notices for key suspects, but the global nature of the scam meant that legal outcomes were limited, and no significant arrests directly related to Diane's case were publicly reported. Emotionally, the aftermath was devastating. Diane struggled immensely with her recovery. Despite medical attention, Diane struggled to regain her strength. The trauma had taken a toll that extended beyond the physical. Her once vibrant spirit now weighed down by the emotional scars of her ordeal. Despite the support of family and medical professionals, her health continued to decline. The trauma of her experience, coupled with the betrayal she felt, led to a battle with depression and PTSD. Tragically, Diane passed away shortly after her return, her body and spirit too weakened by the ordeal to recover. Her family was left to process not only the loss of Diane, but also the profound shock of how quickly their lives had changed. The grief was compounded by the knowledge of how she died, a direct result of a scam that exploited her loneliness and trust. This tragedy spurred them into action against romance scams. They began advocating for awareness, speaking at local and national levels about the dangers of online romance scams. Diane's daughter, Kelly, became particularly vocal, sharing their story to educate others on how to recognize and avoid such scams. They worked with organizations dedicated to scam prevention, pushing for better resources for victims and stricter regulations on online platforms where scammers operate. Their advocacy aimed not only at prevention but also at providing support for those who had already fallen victim, emphasizing the importance of community and intervention. As we continue to explore true crime stories like Diane's, remember to stay vigilant. To hear more true life stories of deception and crime, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Each story sheds light on the complexities of human nature and the crimes that lurk within. Together, we can raise awareness and prevent others from becoming victims. The lessons from Diane's story are manifold. It highlights the vulnerability of individuals seeking connection in an increasingly digital world and the sophisticated methods scammers use to exploit this vulnerability. It's a reminder of the need for caution, for open discussions about online relationships within families, and for better education on digital literacy and security. Reflecting on this tragedy, her family and those touched by her story advocate for a world where people can seek love without fear, where the digital age complements rather than compromises human connections. Diane's journey from hope to horror and the subsequent advocacy by her family underscores a vital narrative. The pursuit of love should not be a pathway to loss, and collective vigilance can be a shield against such dark manipulations.